Today, on a very special episode of The Irreligionist.
We talk about Black Lives Matter, because apparently it's still a thing.
Trigger warning.
The Black Lives Matter movement was started as a trending hashtag in response to perceived racial bias and reported acts of police brutality, with members of the movement suggesting that systematic racism was the cause of these instances of police aggression, mostly centered on individuals who reported to have been unarmed. As the movement took off, with the number of protests and events rapidly growing, some people started accusing the movement of being racist or even a terrorist group, after several events turned violent and even fatal. Personally, I believe that the movement is counterproductive, racially biased, and often inflammatory in the rhetoric some of its members use. Not to mention, BLM seems to ignore the fact that Black Americans are not alone in suffering from many of the so-called Black issues they claim to oppose. I feel it's a throwback movement, something akin to Black Power, and it's mostly a point of needless division. But a young lady I found on the internet is going to help me understand why I'm wrong, I guess. So, here we go.
I looked up Black Lives Matter on YouTube.
Why? I mean, I know why I looked up Black Lives Matter, because I assumed it would give me some cringe with which I could make a video, and it pulled up your vid. So, yay for me. What did you find?
And literally there's nothing, there's no videos.
There are tons of videos. I mean, most of them do rip apart the movement, so maybe check your filter settings and ensure that your echo chamber filter is set to off. There. Now you should be able to see what the internet thinks of Black Lives Matter.
Well, from what I've seen, I didn't go through too many, but I went through 5 videos. There was nothing supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, and I was like, where are all the Black people at?
There couldn't possibly be a reason that people disagree with Black Lives Matter, especially Black people. They have to support it, right? Right?
And then I was reading through the comments, and there was even some Black people saying stuff like, oh, I don't support it because this, and that. And I was like, you don't support it because of ignorance. You don't know.
Well, good thing you know, and you can inform us all just how ignorant everyone that doesn't support BLM actually is. I knew this was gonna be a good day.
So I decided to make a video just pretty much explaining Black Lives Matter.
What a coincidence. I decided to do the same thing. This video, which contains parts of your video. It's very meta.
I'm also making this video because people claim that the Black Lives Matter movement is a terrorist group, racist, and a hate group.
Check, check, and check. People are saying those things, and for reasons. Acts of terrorism have been carried out in the name of BLM, such as vandalizing private property and local businesses, and even some BLM supporters attacking police. Civilians that are guilty of the crime of being white have been assaulted. And, in my opinion, the movement seems to be centered in Black pride. A Black empowerment movement that takes the arbitrary physical trait of skin tone and suggests that it be what people identify as. This, to me, is just as useless as Black guilt, or white pride, or white guilt. Why should anyone try to identify as something they have no choice in, or take pride in the achievement of skin tone that is produced by the existence, or lack, of melanin? BLM is racially divisive because it singles out Black lives and states that they matter, leaving all lives that don't qualify as Black out in the cold. If anyone, ever, said white lives matter, fucking shitstorm. Why is one okay and not the other? BLM also seems to blame so-called racist white privilege people for all the woes they face. So yeah, people are saying those things.
And when Black Lives Matter is said, some people like to reply with all lives matter. And that's true. All lives do matter. Yes.
Good. I'm glad you recognize that, in fact, all lives matter. By seeing that this is true, then I assume you can see how being exclusive of every other skin color besides Black in your slogan can make you look racist?
I'm not saying that every other life doesn't matter. We're just focusing on one race right now because the police brutality amongst the Black race is way higher than most races.
Based on population size, yes. According to the chart you're going to summon later from a certainly unbiased website known as mappingpoliceviolence.org, it shows that unarmed Black people are 5 times more likely to be killed by police when unarmed. Black people make up around 12 to 13% of the US population, and white people are about 64%. According to the chart, for every million white people, 0.5 unarmed whites are shot and killed by police, which, based on the white population consisting of somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 million, means that in 2015, according to this chart, 100 people died, while unarmed Black victims of police shootings accounted for around the 100 mark as well. Not that this is accurate, but based on your chart, just as many white people died. Why not support them with All Lives Matter? Also, even if these numbers are accurate, and I do have some doubts, have you ever thought that there may be reasons for the disparity of unarmed persons of particular races being shot versus others? I mean, non-privileged related reasons, to clarify.
In 2015, unarmed blacks were killed 5 times the rate of unarmed whites. That's nearly 1 in 3 black people killed by the police, but were identified as unarmed.
I wasn't able to find all the data for 2015, but I did find tons of data from the FBI on 2013 that we can examine. Of the murders that led to arrests in 2013, 45% were perpetrated by white suspects, or 64% of the population of the US, while 52% of those arrested for murder were black. In the total number of criminal arrests for 2013, black suspects accounted for almost 30% of all arrests in that year, a number that is disproportional to the size of the population. Black suspects, it appears, are more inclined to run into police, and it would also appear disproportionately more likely to have committed a murder or other violent crime. So these black people suspected of some crime, which I assume is why most of these people came into contact with the police, may have been unarmed, but that is not a fact that the police would have known. Also, police-related deaths of black people only equates to a few percent of the total number of black-affecting murders. Do the 90-some-odd% of black murder victims' lives not matter?
Out of the 102 cases of 2015 where unarmed black people were killed, only 10 of the cases resulted in the officer being charged with crime. 2 resulted in convictions of officers involved.
So if they weren't convicted, then maybe it was found that their actions weren't unwarranted. There may be all manner of mitigating circumstances people aren't aware of in these particular cases that make finding officers guilty, or even chargeable, difficult. It's easy to know in hindsight that someone is unarmed, but in the moment, when a threat may feel imminent, it may not be so black and white. Also, the fact that 2 were convicted is at least some indication that systematic racism isn't the culprit. If it was, wouldn't those officers have been exonerated?
As of this year, 2016, 365 black people have been killed by the police, which is 3 times higher than white deaths. 69% of black people that were killed by the police were unarmed and not suspected of a crime.
Right. First of all, that chart is again per 1 million, and since the white population of the US is over 5 times as large as the black population, well, more white people would actually be dead than black people. Second, how do you know the percentage of these black people that weren't suspected of a crime? Did they comply with law enforcement? Did they move or act in a way that made them seem threatening? That doesn't seem like easily quantifiable data to me. And I'm not suggesting police officers don't make mistakes, sometimes fatal ones, or that some officers aren't racist. They are people, so this is a possibility. I just don't think that it's systematic.
Blacks and whites are treated so much differently to the point where the black man's situation could result in the end of his life. All this information comes together to explain to you why Black Lives Matter is a thing and why it is important.
Right, but white people died from the same things. Not as high in terms of percentage based on population size, but in actual deaths. Sometimes more often. So why not all lives matter? If police brutality is a thing to be concerned about, and at least in some cases it seems to be, why not try to include all of those people who are affected by it? You know, all people.
It does not mean anti-white, and it does not say that black lives are above another's.
It doesn't matter what your interpretation of all of it is. You didn't create the movement, and you don't know the feelings and attitudes of every current supporter of BLM. This is just speculation on your part at best.
The Black Lives Matter organization is focusing on the social injustice of blacks and trying to raise awareness and receive justice for the black people who were killed and unarmed by a white police officer. They are supposed to be peaceful protests to call attention to the movement. Black Lives Matter is not a terrorist group. Yes, I am completely aware that a few Black Lives Matter protests have gone violent, but that is not what the movement stands for. Those Black Lives Matter protests that ended in violence were not meant to end in violence. They had every intention on coming there and being peaceful, but there was those few people that were so angry, they were so fed up with the injustice that black people were not receiving, they fought back.
So because the events were intended to be peaceful, it shouldn't count if they don't stay that way. A movement shouldn't be responsible for crimes that are perpetrated by its members at a movement-sponsored event. Huh. Or is it that the anger of those violent protesters, at the injustices, as you say, was justified, and so we should excuse the attacking of unarmed civilians or the killing of cops?
Many believe the Black Lives Matter movement has no agenda other than yelling and protesting and disturbing the lives of white people. This is also false. Since the earliest days of the movement in Ferguson, groups like the Organization for Black Struggle, the Black Lives Matter Network, and others have made both clear and public a list of demands. Those demands include swift and transparent legal investigations of all police shootings of Black people, official governmental tracking of the number of citizens killed by police, community accountability mechanisms for rogue police officers. Some proposals, like the recently launched Campaign Zero by a group of Ferguson activists, call for body cameras on every police officer, but other groups are more reticent about this solution, since it would lead to increased surveillance and possible invasions of privacy, not to mention a mass governmental database of information about communities of color that are already heavily under surveillance by government forces.
So some groups have come up with demands. Not ideas, but demands. Seems non-threatening. So when I type Black Lives Matter demands into the search bar, one of the first things that pops up is the Movement for Black Lives, which is a coalition group made up of about 50 different organizations, including Black Lives Matter. And a look at their website shows their 6 demands, which include the demand for political power, which demands full and independent black political power, which apparently is a thing to be granted versus worked for, a demand to end the war on black people, which is apparently due to the criminalization, incarceration, and killing of black people, not criminals, but black people. If someone commits a crime and they happen to be black, should they not be punished? And of course, my favorite is reparations, which are owed due to colonialism and slavery, etc. So, money. Of course money would be on the list of demands. There are some good ideas, surprisingly enough, but the package that it all comes delivered in, like so much of the Black Lives Matter movement, is based more on the idea of equal outcome than equal opportunity, while ignoring intra-community issues like the breakdown of the family unit in black communities.
Those people who say that the Black Lives Matter movement should not be focusing so much on white police officer killings rather than the blacks killing blacks in the hoods, and saying that the movement does not care about black on black crime. Going back to the website, it clearly answers this question because apparently a lot of black people have a lot to say on this. The idea that black on black crime is not a significant political conversation among black people is patently false. In Chicago, where high rates of interracial murder occurs, members of the community created the violence interrupters to disrupt violent altercations before they escalate. However, those who insist on talking about black on black crime frequently fail to acknowledge that most crime is intraracial. 93% of black murder victims are killed by other black people. 84% of white murder victims are killed by other white people. The continued focus on black crime is a diversionary tactic whose goal is to suggest that black people don't have the right to be outraged about police violence in vulnerable black communities, because those communities have a crime problem. The Black Lives Matter movement acknowledges the crime problem, but it refuses to locate that crime problem as a problem of black pathology.
Based on this expanded table data of single victim, single offender murder, it does show that the majority of white victims are killed by white suspects, and the same holds true with the black population. However, the total number of murders committed are not proportional to the total population of each group. 13% of white persons killed in 2013 were killed by a black suspect, and about 7% of black murder victims were killed by a white suspect. In fact, according to this chart, more white people were killed in 2013 by black offenders than unarmed suspects of all races were killed by police in that same year. So maybe violence is the problem, and not just affecting one group. Just something to think about.
The government has put various things into the hood to make black people look as if they are animals and to make them even turn against each other. What people fail to realize is that the government did this to black people. Not black people did this to themselves. The government makes them seem as if they are insane and crazy and out of control race. They want black people in the hoods to kill each other. It's systematic oppression. All of it's systematic oppression. And the doings in the hood can be traced back to the white government. Same white government that allows white cops to get away with killing black people for absolutely no reason.
The government did it. It was the Illuminati. People have no free will or independent agency in life, especially black people. Clearly, it's mind control. You can't remove personal responsibility from decisions, while simultaneously trying to hold the majority of the country responsible for what you perceive as their decisions. The government is elected by the people, black and white, and generally acts in accordance with their political views. If you don't agree with how your local, state, or even national government is being ran, the great thing about democracy is you can do something about it. Become political, in a real way. Join a political party, push for the changes you want to see happen, build up your talking points so that you can convince others of your point of view, and when you have some party support, make something happen. Run for office. I don't know. But you can't just reject the facts that you don't like because of their tendency to disagree with you, and you certainly can't blame a race of people for all of your problems and not be thought of as a racist. As a country, we've made great strides in overcoming and learning from our past. I don't want us to backslide to a point where all anyone can see is race. It's counterproductive. Now, on a lighter note, some inspirational words from a great man who understood. Mr. King, take it away.
Because I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Thanks everyone for watching. This has been The Irreligionist. If you have questions, comments, or just want to troll me, feel free to do so in the comments below. And as always, remember to have yourselves a science-tastic day.